Hi, everybody. Welcome to the difference between a 700 and a 750. It's great to be here with you all on various platforms. My name is Paul Fisher. I am a GMAT instructor with Manhattan Prep. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about the difference between a 700 and a 750. I think it's a place where a lot of people get stuck in their score, and they want to move further into the 700s, and they can't seem to figure out why they're not doing that. So it's going to be a great session. While we're kind of letting people show up and get started, one, feel free to click on the link in the chat and in the comments there and check out our course offerings. We have our regular 9-week course. We have an advanced course, which might be more appropriate if you're in this. This is my first time doing something like this on YouTube. So for this audience, maybe that's really thinking about the difference between a 700 and 750, maybe the advanced course would be a good option. But welcome everyone. If you don't mind, I'm wondering if you can tell me, if you would be so kind, where you are watching from today. I am in the Detroit area, Detroit, Michigan, in the United States. So it is just about 10:30 in the morning here. But I know we may have people from all over the world. So let me know where you're at. I do believe that the session is recorded, but I don't know. Guess I don't know that for sure, but I think it will be. Where are we at? Oh, India. Number of people from India. Well, welcome. So I'm guessing it must be pretty late in India. Welcome, and then Kenya as well. Good. Boston. I see. That's great. So welcome to everybody. Taylor and Ravi and Vishak and Taha, Toki Bean. Cool. And then some of you have 8 p.m. in India. Not that too bad. Okay, good. Well, I won't keep you very long tonight. For those that are watching in India or this morning for Taylor. I don't know what time it is in Kenya. I would guess, I don't know, 5 or 6, but that's a total guess. I'm very bad with time zones. That's great. Oh, good. Yep, it is being recorded. It'll be the same link will work later on if you want to watch it again later, or send it to somebody. So that's good. Terrific. How many people here, I'm wondering, have actually already sat for a GMAT or have already started to prepare versus you're just sort of trying to gather information and make a plan? Can you tell me kind of where you're at? It doesn't have to be a life story, it can be like just diving into this, or I'm stuck at 700 and I want to know how to get to 710. Nice, good score. Maybe a lot of us are just planning. Oh, okay. Good. 629, so that's 2.5 months away. All right. Good. So it seems like a number of people watching are cool. Actually, in the midst of this, and in the middle of the GMAT prep, which is great, and getting scores in a good range here, definitely within striking distance of that 750. So that's great. Only one person has mentioned. Okay, thanks, Ravi. And only one person so far, and you don't have to tell me, has mentioned prep in terms of an actual, using a product or something like that. I think that in some ways, I think that not that you have to prep or you have to prep with a company, But the difference between a 700 and a 750, I think, comes down to how well you know the GMAT. I think that somebody who gets a 700 knows some content pretty well, which is great. That's a prereq. SCNR. See, and a couple of, look at the things that are being mentioned in these comments. Sentence correction is coming up a couple of times. CR is coming up. Those in particular are things where it's like you can, knowing some content can get you pretty far. But if you don't know the test, especially with CR, if you don't know what the GMAT wants from you, then you won't know how to deliver it, So I'll just tell a quick story before we dive in. The last time I took an official test, I went in with the goal of getting a 700 exactly. Now you can see on the slide my top score is a 790. That's when I go full throttle, and try my best. But my goal was to get a 700. And so what I had to do was I had to look at questions and ask myself, in my experience with my students, could my students who ended up scoring around a 700, could they have gotten this question right? And I ended up getting a 710, so I didn't get exactly my goal of 700, but I was really close. I felt good about it. And I'll tell you what the difference was between the questions I did and got right and the questions I intentionally got wrong. The ones that I decided I had to get wrong because I didn't think a 700 level score would be able to get them were the ones that required being able to read what was on the screen and interpret it in the context of the GMAT quickly and efficiently without having to spend a lot of time sort of trying to decode it or trying to unwrap it. It was the stuff where you had to come in knowing the test well enough to read something and know what it really meant. And to me, that's the big difference between the 700 and the 750 is how well you've prepared yourself for the GMAT itself, not just for grammar and math, but how well you can look at something and say, because it's the GMAT, I know what this really means. And that's going to be something that we talk a lot about today. So yeah, let's dive in. Okay, somebody just starting with number properties is a tough area. Somebody mentioned in the chat. That happens. So I guess actually I maybe did a little bit of this already. I forgot that I had a slide for it, so we'll just skip it. But if you haven't told me where you're at, in terms of just started studying or whatever, please feel free. But a number of you have, and it seems like most of the people who have replied are in the midst of it right now. But looks like Shreyans has just started with preparation, so that's good. So there are basically three things I want to cover today in this session. One is how to learn at that 750 level, and it's the stuff I was just describing. Okay, how to do that, how to learn that, how to prepare like that. I'm going to try a question with you, and then break it down the way that you need to be able to break things down, and study it the way that you need to study problems that you do, and then talk a little bit about building takeaways from the questions you do. So I'm going to try not to get too far ahead of myself and just kind of stick to doing things in order. So let's start with just what it means to learn at this level. In the middle of prep, yeah, good, welcome. So we're going to talk about executive reasoning. We'll talk a little bit about the scoring algorithm and how that works and what it means for you as you're preparing. And then we're going to talk about decoding the GMAT and learning the code, and then that'll take us into to a practice problem or two that we do. So I'm curious, a lot of you have been working with the GMAT. A lot of you have taken practice tests. I can see your very good test scores in the comments. What do you think the GMAT is testing you on? Have you thought about that as you're taking it? Why am I taking this? What is the test looking for? And maybe those of you that haven't started prepping yet, what do you think it's about? When you talk to your colleagues and your friends who have taken it or who are going through this, what does it feel like it's a test about? Interesting. So I'm going to kind of discuss some of these responses. They're good ones. So it looks like Georgie is saying nerves, and maybe that's a little tongue in cheek, but it is a really big part of what they're testing you on. Is maybe not nerves per se, but your ability to sort of manage what you're doing and what you're thinking about, right? Accuracy in a short span of time, someone said. Again, maybe accuracy isn't quite right. We'll talk about the scoring algorithm, but it is about you managing what you're doing. I think that's huge. Critical reasoning in quant, noticing errors and traps in verbal. One person said it's a general test to check our knowledge and our command of English and basic math. Some people are saying logic, pattern recognition. What most of these responses are descriptions of the kinds of skills that you will deploy on test day, for sure. You're going to use your reasoning. You're going to use some English grammar skills. You're going to use basic math skills. You're going to have to do critical reasoning. Pattern recognition will help you. So these are sort of these are the skills. These are the competencies that you'll use. But I think most of these answers are sort of missing the core. Now, there's a couple that get really close. Adele mentioned stamina in digesting content and using your reason and stuff. And I think that's a very good answer, because the test really is at some point testing you on your ability to not just necessarily stamina, but to make it to the end. And that requires making decisions about what you do and don't do. Another response here, Shreyan said, making decisions under stress. I think that's really good. What you have to know is that it's not an academic test, right? And so some of you did list some sort of academic skills, and of course, like I said, you need some of those things. That's in many cases that's a prereq. But the math skills you need are actually not. I'm not saying the math questions are easy, the quant questions are easy, but the math skills themselves are not high-level math skills, right? You don't need trigonometry. You're not doing calculus. You're not doing any complicated statistical things. And the grammar rules that show up are really kind of few in number. This is not a test of your ability. A lot of other tests you may have taken if you are in the States and you took pre-college tests, or if you've taken some high school admissions tests or the equivalent in other countries, or a lot of other standardized tests really are academic in nature. I think even other graduate tests like LSAT, if the LSAT asks you a question, I kind of feel like the LSAT's interested in whether you can answer it. The GMAT's never about that. It's never only about what's on the screen, and that's eye-opening, I think, for a lot of us as we're preparing for the GMAT. I took my first GMAT 20 years ago, and I was where a lot of you are, where I was doing pretty good, but I wanted to take my score to the next level, and I needed somebody to tell me what the test was really about, so that way I could start focusing on the right things. Okay, the GMAT is a test of your executive reasoning skills. Always remember that the GMAT is supposed to be a predictor of how well you'll do in business school, which hopefully is correlated to how well you'll do in the world of business. And the skills that the GMAT is testing, and I think my own opinion of it is that it's a brilliantly designed test to test these skills, these executive reasoning skills. So this is your ability to analyze information. Somebody mentioned something like that. To decode clues, and think flexibly. But to me, that is sort of about, you read something and you think, what does this really mean? What's happening here? You don't just take things at face value, right? Making decisions about where you see opportunities and being willing to change your mind. Above all, in my classes, the thing that I stress the most, although it's only one part of this executive reasoning, but the way I think about the decisions I make on test day are, this test is testing my ability to manage my time and my mental energy. That's really what it's about. So if you sink too much time into the wrong things, you'll run out of it, and that'll really hurt your score. If you sink too much mental energy into the wrong things, you'll run out of it, and that will really hurt your score. And that's because of the adaptive nature of the test. And so I just am now seeing that there's a comment, choosing your battles. That's huge. Absolutely. That's huge on the test. So on the one hand, it's a little bit of a bummer that, you can't just brush up on your math and your grammar and then you're ready to go. On the other hand, I think for a lot of students, it's eye-opening to find out that the test is really about something beyond that. And once you know that, then you can start preparing and studying and getting ready for that and developing those skills. So let's do a little bit of a pop quiz here. I'm going to talk about the algorithm and the kind of adaptive nature of the test. So we've got two students here moving through, let's say, a quant section. And the blue circles represent correct responses they've given, and the red circles represent incorrect responses. So some of because of how an adaptive test works, that it's a little bit of an oversimplification, but basically if you get something right, the next question will be harder. If you get something wrong, the next question will be easier, right? So I've got two students moving through this section. Student one gets a bunch right, sees some very difficult questions, even gets some of those right. And then, it has a run where a lot of questions are wrong. And so by the end, the questions are easier. Student two sees, has a more steady performance. So student one peaks at a higher difficulty level and gets harder questions right. On average, the difficulty level of questions they see is about the same, right? If you average it out. Student two ends at a higher difficulty level than student one does. So I'm curious, what do you think? Who would earn the higher score here? Let me know in the comments. Do you think that student one earns a higher score because student one saw and correctly answered more very difficult questions? Do you think it's two because of the end, or do you think that it's about the same because on average they kind of saw and did questions of equal difficulty? Let me know what you think about this. Well, I don't know that it's obvious. If you know a lot about the scoring algorithm, then you'll know which one it is. Yeah, so we're about 50-50, one and two, and it is correct that the answer is student two, because where you end is what you get. That's the way you want to think about it. So what's happening is this. The test is trying, you come into the test with a certain ability level, and the test is trying to figure out what that ability level is. And every time you answer a question, right or wrong, you're giving the test information about your ability level that it is using to update its running guess, right? Now, if it were just going to give you random, questions and then figure it out at the end, it wouldn't have to be adaptive. So it's adapting not just necessarily to the question that you just did, it's adapting to its current guess about your ability. So there was definitely a time in the middle of this section that the test thought student one had a very high ability level and was prepared to give student one a high score. But then student one gave the test additional information that contradicted the original information and overwhelmed it. Now, this is a stylized version of moving through this section, but it can go like this. And then ultimately, at the end of the section, the test came to believe that student one had a really low ability level and that some of these things were flukes. So where you end is what you get, because nowhere is the test's guess about your ability level as good as it is at the end. When you've answered that last question, you've given the test all of the information you're going to give it, and it now has its best guess of your ability level, and that's what determines your score. Now, you should know that recovery from early errors is possible, and just like killing your score after you've started off really strong is possible. You should also know that the test does discount outliers. So the few easiest and hardest questions, the few easiest ones you get right, or hardest ones you get right, and the few easiest ones you get wrong, the test is going to discount those a little bit and say those might just be flukes or outliers. So it's okay if you get an easy question wrong, because if you otherwise are doing really well, the test is going to recognize, okay, that was just a fluke or an outlier, which is really nice. On the other hand, if you sink 7 minutes into a really tough quant problem and it's the toughest one you see and you get it right, the test ultimately at the end is going to say, well, that was just a fluke. They guessed because they didn't get anything else near that difficult, right? Yeah, so look at this question in the comment here about student one's data. Yeah, I didn't ever answer the question. It's student two. It's where you end is what you get. Is student one's data, is this showing time running out, is the question that's being posed. And so it's, by the way, it's 2. I just want to make that clear. Student 2 does better on the test, right? It gets a better score because where you end is the score you get. But somebody's asking in the comments, like, what's going on with 1 here? And I think it's possibly 2 things. I think this guess about is it the time running out is a really good guess. How did student 1 get all these really hard questions right? By sinking lots of time into them. And then it was like, oh no, I've got 12 questions left and I only have 6 minutes. And then they had to tear through and put in a lot of guesses and they got a lot of stuff wrong. It also could be the same thing, but with mental energy. So maybe it wasn't necessarily all the time, but all of their mental energy went into these questions, and then they made a bunch of careless errors, or possibly a combination of both. So time is a great question about time in the comments. The amount of time that you spend on each question and the amount of time that's left at the end of the section has no impact on your score. It's only about the difficulty of the ones you get right and the ones you get wrong. So if you get a hard question right in 5 seconds because you just bailed on it and you got it right, that counts just as much as any other right answer. If you finish the section with 20 minutes left, that's the same as if you finished it with 20 seconds left. Where time matters is when you run out of time. Because suppose, it's question 26 and then you haven't been paying attention to the clock and on a quant section and time runs out. So there are 5 questions you didn't get to. The scoring algorithm is going to treat it as though you did those 5 questions and you got all of them wrong. And as you got them wrong, they got progressively easier. So the test is going to create a hypothetical for you for the end of the test, which is where you got everything you didn't put an answer for wrong. And they got easier and you got them wrong. And they all counted. So in the real test, some of these questions, not some of these, but some of the ones you see are experimental. They don't count for your score at all. They're just there so the test can determine how difficult the question is. But if you don't get to the questions at the end, if you leave questions unanswered, the test treats it as though they all would have counted, even if that's not the case. Furthermore, when you don't finish, the test assesses an additional penalty for not finishing. So when we talk about this as being a test of your executive reasoning, your ability to manage what you're doing, what you're thinking about, what you're spending your time and your energy on, this is how they build that into the test. Is the impact on your score of not finishing is really, really significant. Another great comment too, that the student 1 maybe skipped some things. It could be, right? This could just be bad luck, that all the stuff student 1 knew showed up in the first half and all the stuff student 1 didn't know showed up in the second half. Absolutely, that can happen as well. So here's the thing that you have to understand about this test, right? People go into the test with different ability levels, scoring at different levels, but because of the adaptive nature of the test, it's giving them questions that kind of bounce around their ability level, right? So both of these students are missing about half the questions. Now, in reality, it's probably not about half. If you're scoring pretty well on quant, say, you're probably missing maybe 40% of the questions. But it's significant. You're missing a lot of questions. But it feels difficult for everyone. Student 1 is going to see harder questions because student 1 is better at the test, but they are both going to leave this test feeling like they were really challenged and like they probably got a lot of stuff wrong. So you can't allow any sense of how you feel like you're doing to cloud your judgment or to factor into your decisions. So somebody says guessing at the end would be better than skipping. So you can't skip questions. Because of the adaptive nature of the test, you have to answer a question before you can see the next one. But it would be better to just put in a guess than to let time run out, for sure. If you've got 5 that you haven't gotten to and you have 12 seconds, put in an answer to as many of them as you can. Isn't it true that a correct, harder question increments more in score than an easier one does? So again, it's about the test updating its guess. And so the movement of the score is going to depend on how much information it already has. So scores tend to move more at the beginning because the test has less other information, right? At the end, the score doesn't move as much because, the 31st quant question is the 31st piece of information. It's only 3% of the information set, so it's not creating huge swings. And again, in terms of like the hardest one you get right is going to be discounted as a fluke, just like the easiest one that you get wrong. The thing is, you don't know the difficulty level of the questions when you see them, and you don't know how well you're doing. So your best option always is to just think about, what can I do on this, and is it worth it? Do I feel like this question is worth my time and my mental energy? Because here's something very important that people don't think about a lot. Say right now you're starting off and you can get now it sounds like from the scores I saw in the comments, maybe many of you aren't starting off at a 21 in, say, quant or something, but maybe you are. You're just starting to study and you don't really know much about the test yet. What's going to happen is the test is always going to be choosing questions from a range around your ability level, right? And you'll see some hard questions, some easy questions, sort of centered around your ability level. As you study and you get better, you raise your ability level, right? Which is great. But that just means this whole range moves up. So that means the stuff that used to be right at your ability level now has to be easy for you. And as you continue to improve, you end up in a situation where the stuff that has to be easy for you on test day is stuff that in the past you were not even able to do. So the problem that I see with a lot of students, the way they prepare, is that they focus on just like the hardest questions. I just want to do hard questions. I want a 750. I'm going to do all the 750 level questions. I'm going to get the advanced OG and I'm going to do those questions. But the problem is you're not going to see those questions, or not enough of them, to get the score you want if you haven't gotten excellent at doing these questions. Right? The ones that are at or below your current ability level, those are the ones that you need to be spending most of your time on, because you have to perfect those. You have to be able to execute those questions without wasting your time and your mental energy. And if you don't get better at the easy questions and the medium questions, it does not matter how many hard questions you can do. Your score is built on easy and medium questions. And then hopefully you see enough hard questions, you get a couple of them right, and you can convince the test that you have a high ability level. But your plan can't be to go into the test and have every question be a slog for you. You'll just run out of mental energy. Yeah. I don't know how much time I want to spend on this right now, because I do want to get into some questions. We're about halfway through. But you should know that every combination of a quant and verbal score can map to up to 3 different total scores. So the ones that are shown in this table are the sort of the median. So for example, I have a 5151, but I didn't get an 800. I got a 790, and that's because I got a quant question wrong. So if you're looking for, now I've grayed out these verbal scores of 47 and above, because these are actually really kind of hard to get. It's just, it really becomes about luck here. I have a colleague who got every verbal question right and didn't get a 51. And it must have been because the randomness in the test algorithm assigned him too many questions that were a little bit below his ability level and not enough that were at or above. And so just randomly, he saw a slightly easier set of questions and he got a 50 instead of 51. So these are really hard to get. So don't plan on that. Okay. That should not be anybody's goal or plan. If you get there, that's great, but you shouldn't plan on it. But many of you will be able to top out 51 on quant. 3% of test takers do that. So if you're looking for a 750, you are most likely going to have to get a 48 or higher on quant, and then a really good verbal score. If you get a perfect quant score, you can let your verbal score drop to like 41. If you somehow can get into the stratosphere on verbal, then you can have a quant score, about 45 or 47. But just know, and some of you have already done some of this work, for most of the top schools that you 750 scores are looking at, they're going to want to see a 45 on quant at a minimum and a 36 on verbal at a minimum. That combination probably won't get you in into every one of those schools, but those would be your minimums. So for the 750s, you're looking at a really good quant score and then a verbal score in the 40s. All right. So the last thing that's going to take us into our questions now is this thing I was talking about before, which is being able to decode what the GMAT is telling you. And this really is it's a little bit about math in some ways, but it's more about just knowing the GMAT. Because I can give you something like this: y squared is less than y. And if you know the math, you'll be able eventually to figure out what that means and to do something with it. But the problem is, on test day, you don't have the time and mental energy to figure that kind of stuff out every time it shows up on the screen. So you've got to come in kind of knowing, what does this mean on the GMAT, right? It's not enough to just look at this and take it at face value. So in the comments here, Alak is saying y lies between 0 and 1. That's right, because what this is telling us is that when we raise this thing to a higher exponent here, when we square it, it's getting smaller, and there aren't a lot of numbers that are going to do that, right? So what you need to do is, when you encounter something like this on a practice question, you need to learn it and to study it in a way that you'll be able to recognize it when it comes up, and also in different forms. So one thing you could do, for example, is flashcard stuff like this. On one side, you put, it's when I see whatever, when I see blank, right? When I see y squared is less than y. Or, think of a different version of it. What if it were cubed? Then I'll think and do this, right? So it's about sort of training yourself to recognize the things that show up again and again on the test, and the way that they say things without saying them directly, to make it easier for you to decode what's going on. At the score level that you are all looking at, if you're here looking to find out what the difference is between a 7 and a 750, you cannot just go into the test and take things at face value. Taking things at face value can get you a score in the mid 6s, maybe the high 6s, maybe getting close to 700. But in order to really go beyond that, you have to be able to look at what's happening. And frankly, even for those lower scores, it'll make it easier for you if you can look at what's happening and figure out what it really means and what the GMAT's telling you. Right? So if it's y squared is less than y, then it's exactly right. Y must be between 0 and 1. If it's y cubed is less than y, that's a little different. It still could be that y is between 0 and 1, but it could be that y is negative and less than -1, right? Because then as we cubed it, its absolute value would increase, but that would make it more negative. Right? All right, let's try a question here. I'm going to open up a clock here. I'm going to move it out of the screen though, so I have it. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do this. And what we want to focus on here in this last part of the presentation, well, there'll be one little small part at the end, but is the difference between exam mode, which is when you're practicing, working under test conditions with a timer, no calculator, and then what happens after. I find that many of my students are really good at exam mode. They test themselves, they time themselves, they do a bunch of questions, and they're really bad at study mode. And that's really going to be the focus of what we talk about. Anyway, this is a data sufficiency question. I think most of you probably are familiar with what that means. But just a real quick description. It's asking you a question up here that you can't answer without more information. statements 1 and 2 give you additional information, and then the question asks you how much of that information do you need to be able to answer the original question. So you don't need the answer to the original question, you just need to know when you can get it. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to work on this, and feel free to send me an answer in a comment when you have one. And I'll be quiet and I'll let you work for a couple of minutes. We got about 30 more seconds. All right, so that's 2 minutes. So you got to choose an answer. It is important that you time yourself when you practice, because the test is timed. You want to practice the way that you're going to have to do the test. I generally don't always recommend timing individual questions, because on test day you will be able to spend a little bit more time on some questions, a little bit less on others, and you need to learn that skill of managing your time. But we're only doing one question today, so we'll just time the one question. But most of your practice should be in sets of questions. All right, lots of answers here. Thank you for that. So, this is a tough question, and what happens a lot of times with students is that they just dive right into tough questions like this, and you may struggle with it, or you may not, or you might be able to crack it. But how effectively you can do this question, and how much mental energy and time you use is really determined by the work you've done prior to even seeing this question, before getting to this question. So what I want to do is I want to take a look at some variants of this question that are a little bit easier, and then see what we can learn from those, and then come back to see if we can apply it to that question. All right? This is what your study should be about: doing questions, sort of easy, medium questions, learning what you can about the GMAT and how to decode it, learning those things really well, and then doing the hard questions where the decoding becomes the primary skill, and you're ready for them, right? Yeah, it's a tough question. I chose a tough question on purpose. So let's do this one. I won't give you 2 full minutes on this one, but it's a real similar question. I haven't changed statement 1, but change statement 2. So go ahead and try this one for a minute and see if you can answer this one. Let's give you a few more seconds here. All right. So this it's a real similar question, but it's a little bit easier. So first of all, this is just a general DS tip, although it's an application of this larger GMAT principle of just not taking things at face value. Can the integer k be expressed as the product of two integers, each of which is greater than 1? Let's spend some time thinking about what that means. You don't just read this and go, oh yeah, I wonder, can k be expressed as the product of two integers, each of which is greater than 1? This is saying something. This means something. And we have to decode it first, right? So you want to think about it like this. Can I think of any number that would give a yes, right? Sure, I can. 4 can be expressed as the product of two integers, each of which is greater than 1. It's 2 times 2. 12 is 4 times 3, and 6 times 2, right? 33 is 3 times 11, whatever. So I can think of lots of numbers that can give me a yes. What kind of numbers could give me a no? That's right. Prime numbers can give me a no, right? Very good. So 2 can't be expressed as the product of two integers, each of which is greater than 1. Neither can 3, because that can only be 3 times 1, but there's only one of those is greater than 1, sometimes 11, right? So what this question is really asking is k a composite number, which is non-prime, right? Those numbers that are built out of primes are called composite. They're composed of prime numbers. That's what it's asking. And if we just take it at face value, we might really struggle to to take the information in the statements and decide how it answers the question, right? So the question is not, can k be expressed as the product of two integers, each of which is greater than 1? The question is k a composite number, a non-prime number, right? So the statements then, are not that hard to work through in that once we know that, right? Statement 1, if you don't recognize this symbol here, that's factorial, right? So this is saying that k is greater than 4 factorial, which is 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which means that's a multiplication. This is telling us that k is greater than 24. That's a weird thing to happen on there. K is greater than 24. I don't know why that's happening. Just erase that a little bit. So does that tell us whether k is composite? Well, I mean, there are numbers greater than 24, like 25, that are composite, which gives me a yes. This is a very weird thing that's happening. But there are numbers that are greater than 24 that are prime, right? Like 29, which would give me a no. So if it's 25, the answer is yes. If it's 29, the answer is no. So that's insufficient. So I would eliminate A and D, right? We'll just see what happens with my pointer for some reason. Statement 2 is the one we've made easier. And we know that it's got to be a number between 83 and 89. So we should list them out. If they're all composite, then we know where we're at. If one of them is prime, then we know. Why is this happening? There we go. We'll get through it. Oh yeah, maybe I do have one. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I should just be using that instead of my mouse. Thanks, Ed. Anyway, the point is that for all of these numbers are composite, right? So we get a yes here. 84 is, all the even ones are definitely composite numbers, right? 85 we can see as a multiple of 5. 87 might be the one that you struggle with, but it's 3 less than 90. 90 is a multiple of 3. So anything 3 away from 90 must also be a multiple of 3, right? All of the multiples of 3 are 3 apart. Yeah. Or you can maybe just, what this is 29 times 3, but I'm not that smart. So when I look at something like this, I just have to go, well, if I add 3, I get 90. So I know since 90 is a multiple of 3, this must be. So these are all composite numbers. So statement 2 gives us a definite yes. So the answer is B. So what I'm demonstrating to you is like, this is earlier in my studies, right? I did easier questions as I was learning a concept, and I learned how to interpret this question, right? If you're talking to me about the number of factors that a number has and whether they're greater than 1 and so on, you're talking to me about whether it's prime. So when I look at a question like this on test day, I don't have to spend any time or mental energy interpreting it because I've done enough of this and I've studied the GMAT enough that I know that this is really a question about whether this is prime, right? That's the difference between a 700 and 750, because a 700 test taker might get there, but it's going to take more time and mental energy. And a 750 level test taker reads this and knows exactly what's going on. So he's asking, why is K is greater than 4 factorial even there? Well, I mean, questions would be much easier if everything was automatically sufficient, right? Then every answer would be D. So this is here because it's true, and the question is it enough, right? And it's not enough. But it's still true. It just isn't enough. Oh, nice. Well, good luck on your GMAT journey. Let's try this one, 2 minutes. Similarities maybe to the other ones, but not, the statements are very different. So try this one. All right, just a few more seconds. So a lot of people landing on the same answer on this one. So let's go back to this sort of interpreting the code stuff. What is this question really asking? When it says C is the sum of these two integers, does C have more than one factor greater than 1? What does that mean? How should I interpret that question? I'm not going to have time to do a verbal question today, but I didn't think I was. But a lot of this similarities, there's going to be a lot of similarities to the way that you want to think about how you prepare. By the way, there was a question earlier in the comments that said, how can we get free material of 700 plus level questions? So, you know, I don't know that you want to start with 700 level questions. That's what I was saying before, is that you have to ace the easy and medium stuff. Has to come so naturally that you don't have to think about it. And if you're not there yet, then you're not done with those questions. You know, it's not time for 700 yet. This is asking us, again, it's another version of the same code. It's asking you, is C composite? If a number has more than one factor greater than 1, that means it has itself at least and some other factor that isn't 1. That means it's not prime. It's the same question, right? By the way, we can easily eliminate A, B, and D as answers, I think, here, because C is the sum of A and B, and there's nothing that makes A special or B special. And so knowing about just one of them could never be enough. If A is a multiple of 3, if A is 3, B could be 2 and the answer would be no, or B could be 3 and the answer would be yes, right? And same thing with B. If B is a multiple of 6, if B is 6, A could be 1 and the answer is no because it's prime, or A could be 6 and the answer is yes. So it really comes down to this one to C and E. This is another version of something that we just saw in that last. Remember when I was talking about 87 and I said that the multiples of 3 are all 3 apart, right? And so if A is a multiple of 3 here, then it might be a number like 3 or 6 or 9. But if B is a multiple of 6, then it's also a multiple of 3. So what I have here with A and B is 2 multiples of 3. And if I add 2 multiples of 3, I'm going to end up with a multiple of 3 because the multiples of 3 are all separated by 3. If I add 2 multiples of 5, I'm going to get a multiple of 5, right? If I add 2 multiples of 10, I'm going to get a multiple of 10. So this one should be C, which a lot of you got. Let me catch up on the comments here. This general question about the time and effort required, that's a question I should probably develop a good answer to because I get asked it a lot. I think it would probably take at least a month, and that'd be with a lot of time being able to spend on studying. It's a big, it's not as big as going from 5 to 550 or something like that, right? Cool. So let's go back to the original question where we started. So now I think we have a better sense of how to interpret this. If you didn't know before, does the integer k have a factor p such that p is between 1 and k? So this is again asking us if this number k is a composite number, right? Is there a factor other than 1 and k for the number k? So is k composite? That's what the question is asking. Right? K is an integer, and the question is it composite? We already kind of worked through this statement, number 1, on that other question. It's telling us that k is greater than 24, so there's some yeses and some nos, so that one's insufficient. This one, the second one, is the one where I think most people struggled when we initially did this one. But we had this sort of, the one thing we learned how to interpret was this question about the factors. The other thing we learned how to interpret was this idea of multiples of numbers and how far apart they are, right? So if you think about these numbers like 13 factorial plus 2, before we get to that, I realized I wanted to say this. It looks crazy, so you may just guess here. That's okay. If you feel like you eliminated A and D because one is not sufficient, it must be B, C, or E. Not a bad place to be guessing from if it's a really tough question. You know that it can't be C here because k is greater than 24 isn't different. It's not adding anything. So this is something that happens a lot on the test, and you have to learn to recognize it, that saying that k is greater than 24 doesn't add anything to this because 13 factorial is obviously a really big number. So this is already telling us that k is a really big number, much bigger than 24. So when one statement includes the other, right? Statement 2 implies statement 1. It can't be A and it can't be C because putting them together doesn't add anything. On the other hand, if you're thinking this looks really complicated, I don't know what to do, the reason I'm guessing, the reason I'm bailing is because I'm a little bit lost. If that's the case, then don't guess E. If you're bailing because it looks too complicated, you should guess that it's sufficient. See that there's a conversation going on that I don't think is necessarily directed at me, so I'm not going to, I don't think I'm going to dive into that. But if we really want to think about it, right, 13 factorial plus 2 is the product of all the numbers from 13 to 1 plus 2. And 13 factorial plus 3 is the same thing, but with a 3, and so on, all the way to 13 factorial plus 13. But again, notice if 13 factorial has a 2 in it, so 13 factorial is an even number. It's a multiple of 2. So if I add 2 to it, it's still a multiple of 2. So this number is a composite number. 13 factorial is a multiple of 3 because there's a 3 in it. If I add 3, it's still a multiple of 3. It's 3 more than a different multiple of 3. I don't know what this number is, but it's a multiple of 3. And if I add 3, I still get a multiple of 3. 13 factorial plus 13. 13 factorial is a multiple of 13. If I add 13, still a multiple of 13. So in this case, statement 2, by limiting it to numbers that are 2 more than 13 factorial, between there and numbers that are 13 more than 13 factorial, all of those numbers have to be composite because they are all a multiple of something between 2 and 13. So the answer to this one is definitely B. Now, this question, this presentation might seem like, we spent the last 27 minutes, doing a couple of questions. So it might be about content, but it's not. Oh, this ADBCE is just a easy way to keep track of your eliminations on DS. Because if you figure out that statement 1 is insufficient, you can eliminate A and D. If statement 1 were sufficient, then you would eliminate B, C, and E. So it's just an easy way to do that. But the real point of this was to talk about, yes, the answer is B, to talk about this idea, right, of preparing for that hard question isn't just about learning the math, and it's not about doing that question and then reading an explanation for it. It's all the work that you did in the weeks leading up to that, where you did easier questions and you did a lot of them and you studied every question that you did. And you learned how to decode what the GMAT is giving you, right? So again, find a way to study this. If I see something that is an integer and they're asking me for a factor between 1 and that integer, and there are different ways that it could show up, right? A factor P that's between 1 and K, or the product of 2 integers that are both greater than 1, or has more than one factor that is greater than 1. All these different ways that it can show up. What it's really asking me is whether the number is composite or prime, right? That's the work that you have to do on those easy and medium questions that you're studying. You're not just doing them and getting them right and then patting yourself on the back and moving on. You need to be learning from those questions. What I tell my students is that every question you do, you should treat it like a chapter of a textbook. There is something there for you to learn. And there are really 3 things that you should be thinking about as you review questions. One is content, of course. The second, though, is that doing that question can teach you something about yourself. And I think you need to learn those things, right? How did I react to this? Where did I kind of dig my heels in and get too stubborn and not give up? Where did I give up too early? Learn about those things about yourself and see if those things that help you, find ways to exploit them and use those tendencies more. And those that hurt you, find adaptive strategies to adjust. And then the third thing, and the one that most people miss, is learning about the test maker. Every question you do, even easy ones, even ones that you get right and you don't struggle on, can teach you something about the GMAT. And that's the stuff that you really need to to make sure that you learn. So we're not going to do this. So again, so the actual exam, I think, is at the same level as the practice exams that you get from GMAT. The difference is that any practice test has a much smaller question pool. So you're going to see a much greater variance in difficulty. So that means some that are harder, but of course, if you're scoring at really high levels, there's not much room for harder questions. So you will see more easier questions on like a GMAT practice test versus test A, because test A is a gigantic question pool and it has enough it can afford to keep giving you questions right at your ability level. But any practice test is going to have to go into the ends of that distribution a little bit more just because of the number of questions. So I think it's the difficulty level on average is about right, and the scoring algorithm is still as accurate. It just might be, for top scorers, it might be easier to do well on a that GMAT practice test. I think our Manhattan ones are really tough and really challenging at all levels. And it almost goes the other way, where it's harder to do well on a Manhattan CAT. Although the scoring algorithm, again, is still accurate. It's just about whether it's hard or easy to, to give that kind of performance. So yeah, I want you to think about the difference between exam mode, which is doing those practice questions, and study mode, right? Which is when you're reviewing what you've done and you're learning and you're building skills and knowledge that you're going to use later on hard questions. So on exam mode, you should time yourself and you have to pick an answer. That's the test, right? There's a clock ticking and you can't just give up. And you want to try to make a decision that you would want to make on the real thing. So if you're practicing and you're in exam mode, don't let yourself run over the clock and go, well, I'm just going to take 10 minutes on this problem because I really want to crack it. No, you can't. You don't want to do that on test day. So you have to practice cutting yourself off, right? But then you enter study mode. Try it again with no clock. Take as long as you need, right? Analyze every part of the question and everything you do and you write down. Try it multiple ways. If you need to get out your study guides and your books and the materials you're using to study, then do that, right? And then develop concrete takeaways for every question. What did you learn about the content? What did you learn about yourself? And what did you learn about the test maker? That's what you need to focus on. You should spend at least twice as much time reviewing the question as you spend in study mode as you spend in exam mode, but I really think it should be much more than that. I often tell my students to do like a 4-question quant set, for example, 4 questions in 8 minutes, and then spend the rest of an hour reviewing them. So 1 hour is 4 questions and the thorough review of those questions. All right. I think I'm going to wrap it there. Are there any questions that I can answer about this sort of idea of learning the test to cool. Oh, how long does it take to prep for GMAT considering starting from scratch? Yeah. I always, maybe it's a little bit, I don't know what the word is, I always recommend a course. I needed a course I needed somebody to tell me what this test was about and really open it up. And I think courses are great, even if it's a self-guided or something like that. But so I think starting with something like that is good. So I think 3 months is probably, for most people, the minimum. Yeah. But, many people spend longer than that. I find that if you're spending like 6, 8, 9 months, you probably are missing something really critical about the test. That either a course or a tutor can help you with. So probably the best thing to do is to try to take a practice test somewhere to see kind of where you're at, and then use that to guide, okay, do I need to start with a course? Do I start with an advanced course? Do I do some, are there just some holes in my foundation, some topics I need to go cover on my own? Should I, go with a tutor or something like that? You know what? I am not an admissions expert, so I'm unfortunately can't field questions about admissions broadly. I just happen to be a teacher who's very good at the GMAT. But my sense of the answer to that question is that it does matter, at least a little bit, for sure. I don't think that there's any score that is that a guarantee to get you in anywhere. And there's also, lots of people with seemingly not terrific scores that get into great schools, right, because of their profile. So. Well, this has been really great. It's been a lot of fun. I hope that that you enjoyed it and that you learned some stuff. And if you want to check out our materials, just manhattanprep.com/GMAT or kaplan.com/GMAT. And you can find me there as well. Yep, there's a link for you. Awesome. Are we able to have a question? I don't know. That sounds like a student services question to me. I don't think I know this question, the answer to the question about what you get when you buy the exams. Great. Well, thank you all. Thanks for the questions and the comments and the feedback. And oh yeah, I should do that. See, this is my first time doing something like this. I'm no good at that. I'll give you my LinkedIn here in just a moment. I gotta find it. See, you guys are all better at this stuff than me. Here it is. And you know what? Actually, I don't know that I have a way to get into the comments. So I'm going to put it in. I'm going to send it to our friend at GMAT Club, and maybe they can get it into the comments for me. I hope that that's okay. I don't have a place that doesn't look like where I can enter comments that you can see. There it is. It's just Paul Aaron Fisher. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. And good luck to those of you that are in the middle of this. Good luck getting to that next level with your score. Take care.